Unintentional community. We live together in a house.
Welcome back to the Unintentional Community Podcast. This is our 4th episode, but if you're new to the show, you should go back to episode 1. This is a 5-episode podcast run where myself and my housemates are talking about life together with our baby. And along the way, if you have any questions for us, we're going to be answering them in our 5th and final episode. And you can email those questions in to askahouse@gmail.com. Housey spelled Housie, askahouse@gmail.com. And with that said, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to the Unintentional Community, week 4. And this week, we're going to get weird and religious.
Super
We
religious.
intentionally had to wait till episode 4 because we know lots of people listening to this show will have all sorts of thoughts on faith and spirituality and religion. But it is a big part of our house, and it's also a part of how we know each other. So let's get weird and Jesus-y. But first, let's get all your names in case people are new to the show. I'm Kevin.
I'm Ben.
I'm Meg.
I'm Meredith.
I'm Steph.
And if you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes, you should. We talked about our daughter Clementine last week and what it's like to be in a family together, kind of with all these houses involved. We talked about expectations on week 2. We talked about the pros and cons of living in community in week 1. This week, let's get up. Big ups for God.
For the Lord.
For the Lord.
Can I get some hands up for
LJC.
the Lord?
But if you are listening, and here's how I thought we could start this episode. If you're listening and you're not a part of a church or a religious group, or you are not down with religious talk, here's what we want you to know about what faith looks like for us. And I'm going to just throw this out there. Ideally, we can all throw in a little thing. What do you want just people to know when we're talking about faith? Because there are all sorts of assumptions and baggage that talking about Christian faith in particular can bring. So let's go around, toss something that you just want people to know as they come into this so that we can set some reasonable expectations.
Sure. Well, I think one thing that you can relate to, whether or not you are a person of faith, is that you know yourself and you know the ethos by which you would like to live. And the thing about for us living with other Christians is that we have a collective idea of that ethos. And so we have people who help call us to be that person. And so I think no matter where you are, if you have an idea of the kind of person you want to be, you know that you want to surround yourself with people who will call that out of you. And so that's, I think, kind of the biggest pro and con is it's wonderful to have people who call you to be that best version of yourself, but it's also a challenge because people call you on your bullshit. So that's kind of what it comes down to practically.
Yeah.
So even if you're not religious, I think you know that kind of pull of who you are and who you would like to become.
Yeah, for me, I would want to just communicate that religion and our relationship with God and being part of a church has been life-giving more than it has ever been restrictive or rule-based. And so I think a lot of people think of rule-based religion or moral management or things like that. But for me, it's just been the most life-giving experience being part of a community and being someone who tries to live like Jesus and all of the spiritual practices that come with that have been really life-giving for me. So and a positive experience.
Nice.
I think one whatever spiritual experience that you participate in or do not participate in, I feel very comfortable saying we all here respect all of those things. Well, I mean, maybe
Except for those the goat sacrifice people.
I mean,
I have
respect
a pretty hard
them.
time, having an intelligent conversation with flat earthers. But
But you
a
don't know
little give
how I
and take.
feel about the Earth. Something we've never talked about.
Oh, no.
We're talking about
Episode
how
5, Flat Earth Theory defended.
I would say rather than any approval, it's more like a general respect kind of things like that,
Yeah.
where just
Yeah.
we respect
Just understand where we're
all
coming
those
from.
kinds of things. Yeah, we're not judging anyone else for not.
We
having
all
these
have our
thoughts.
own amounts of spiritual baggage, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Oh,
So if you also have that, that's okay.
Precisely.
That is not news to us. We are here with that as well.
What? The church has done bad things in history.
And we're still part of it.
Why?
Yeah. For anyone listening, I would encourage you to keep listening if you have some baggage and some history with how you've been treated by the church or how people you loved have been treated by the church.
Yeah.
Because I think that experience is reflected in our what we collectively have experienced as a group of housemates living together in a church. both within our own and in our past experience. So don't tune out just because we're talking about Jesus. Don't tune out just because we're talking about the church. We're going to say things that you might not believe in. But I think down at the very root and the very core of it, there are some things that are applicable to being a human on this earth and living with other humans on
And I
this
don't
earth.
believe them every day anyway, so it's okay.
Well, exactly,
why you
right?
stick around other people.
Yeah, it's challenging, and like
Oh, I love
our
that, Meg.
experiences or your experience is reflected in our shared experience as well. So there's some commonality that we have there.
We cool, fam. We cool.
And I mean, and some things we are cool, but yeah, like Ben said, there are things that we believe that are things we genuinely believe, and
Yeah.
and won't be understood, and that's okay. Disagreement is fine.
Yeah.
But I think for us, like being a Christian is quite a simple thing as well. It's trying to live like Jesus for other people. And when we talk about our faith, it's not an us as like people in a church or Christians against other groups of people. I think the vision of faith that we all live out of is it's us for the world, that like following Jesus blesses the world, helps other people, and ultimately should be part of the healing of the world and not like an escape from the world or something like that.
Exactly.
And so even in this, we're trying to pull out the best of our own tradition and the world that we live in for the sake of whoever's listening to this, whether or not you're a part of the group that we're a part of, we're all tied up in being human as well. And so we see this as a blessing.
Yeah.
So Ben, I might talk about being queer in this episode. Would you
Totally fine.
be on the table
Yeah.
with that? Okay.
Yeah.
we'll discuss.
And
Thank
one
you.
other thing, I wonder if that part should open with a thing of like we're all like we're talking about faith and religion, but like have we said like we're Christians and we met at church? Like is that a thing? That
Well, I think we can get into this.
Yeah.
story
Okay,
of
cool.
I think we
Okay.
covered it
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
I
right,
think
cool.
it'll be cool.
Okay.
Snap back to reality. Oh, there
goes gravity.
Okay,
Okay.
so why don't we just quickly talk about how we all connected through church? Because that is where we met one another at the church that Meg and I were part of starting, Eucharist Church in downtown Hamilton. And then I think it was like all y'all jumped in at different times. We did talk about this briefly on episode 1, but I think just maybe tying in how that tied into our relationship as a household would be worthwhile as an origin.
I don't know.
Do you want me to go first because I was the first one in?
I think you and I have actually like almost identical timelines. I think we actually jumped into Eucharist around the same time.
But in the
Pretty
house,
close.
I was about 8
Yeah.
months into Eucharist starting.
You were a little bit, and you're also the kind of person who jumps in and jumps
I was a
in with
volunteer
both
coordinator
feet.
within 6 weeks.
With
Yes.
both
6 minutes.
jumped
6
in.
minutes. She means
6 minutes. As soon
How
as
do we even have volunteers that early? I guess everyone's volunteer. at that
I
point.
jumped in a little bit more reluctantly and a little bit with a lot more hesitation because I wasn't sure that I wanted to continue being a Christian. And so,
and
yeah,
that's just the
there's-
Ben way.
That's just the Ben way. And like still to this day, like I think that I could take on more responsibility, but I have hesitations. So I've been going to Eucharist for, oh my goodness, I don't even know. What year is
I
it
can
now?
tell you
2018?
7 years.
No.
This is 2018, and you were there. We started in 2010, and you were there in 2011.
Wow, that's crazy.
So you were 15.
Got that
I was
7-year
not
itch.
7-year itch, yeah. Okay, 7 years. Wow, that's nuts. Yeah, I came a couple times when we were at Delta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
That's when I remember you.
And then
That's our
started
second
coming a
building we
lot
rented.
more regularly at St. Paul's. Yeah.
We rented 5 buildings in the first 5 years. It's a
Yeah.
long story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then wasn't really friends with you guys until we like moved into St. Paul's, and then I don't know, I just started volunteering on things and being a little bit more involved. And then finally, when like Meg could remember my name and Kevin was just getting to remember my name, then things started to roll along, and then our friendship kind of grew and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and we
that's good.
were in a
hosted
small
food
group
for a
together.
small group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
You made charcuterie boards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first time I found 2 checks, each for $60, and so in my room while I was cleaning, and so I spent $120 on just like assorted cold.
Yes,
the
yeah. It was
greatest
just
small
a
group
big
ever.
conversion
Story.
moment for me. It was my first time having prosciutto,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
thank you, Ben, for that.
Praise Jesus. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Praise hands up.
Yeah. So for prosciutto bros.
Yeah, and
together.
that small group was at our house, so
Yeah.
that's kind of a cool little turn
That was
of events.
great. That was a really, really good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, my connection to our house and to Hamilton in general is through our church and through Kevin and Meg. I like it's got to be 5 years ago that I visited a friend who lived in Hamilton just for a weekend, and she was going to Eucharist, and just like I went with her. I met Kevin, I think, just like because there was some sort of church event and church, like a potluck maybe in church that day. And like I had been living down near Baltimore at this time, so not at all close to home, but like I immediately felt like bitten by this bug of like whatever's happening in Hamilton, I don't know what it is, but I just have to be here. Like I just felt this pang. And then Kev, I think we were Facebook friends or something, but he kept in touch, or he kept tabs on my art, the art that I was
Your
making.
art was so good, and I was
It
like,
wasn't good
who
then,
is this
but but I don't know. They just were very faithful friends and like really supportive. And then at a certain point, Eucharist got big enough that it could like it got a summer student grant, and like they started an art residency, which was so amazing. And they had been doing that for a couple years when I eventually got it, and I kind of viewed that as my ticket to coming to Hamilton. Just because I wanted to be here. But likewise to Ben, I think when I got to Hamilton and was like doing the residency, and that was like for Eucharist Church, so like there was like every aspect of that was spiritual and was very much kind of bringing the rhythms of the Spirit into it. Like it was so much thing. I think I realized at that point that I was really teetering on the edge with my faith and not being sure what I wanted with Jesus, if anything. But because Eucharist is a community that is it is pretty radically different from what I grew up with. In general, growing up in America in church is a really different experience than anything you'll find in Canada. Like there's a lot of ways that Canada and the US, like I grew up for 20 years in the States before I came back here. So in a lot of ways, there are some similarities, but one of the biggest things I find to be different is in church communities. And I grew up in fairly traditional, more conservative churches. Like I would judge people for wearing jeans to service growing up.
And now
I
preach
will
in
wear a crop
backwards
top to
hat.
church. I'm so sorry.
Sometimes you're just covered in bicycle grease. You're like, what's up?
Always covered in bicycle grease. But like coming up and seeing that there's a way to follow Jesus and live out the gospel with people who are poor, who are refugees and immigrants, or aren't doing a great job of it, kind of thing, but still get to come and seeing, very different ways of living than I thought was like the way to live as a Christian. Like I saw women who were getting older and not getting married and having kids, but having these amazing lives. I saw queer people who were living openly and following Jesus, and that being the definer of their identity, which was huge for me, being able to come out years later, kind of thing. And so in some ways, like I know that like the work of Jesus is happening throughout every church and like throughout the globe. It's not just my one church that's special and that I don't want to go to any other church, but like at this point in my life, like being part of our church community was very pivotal for my faith. And it's the kind of thing where I know that like I may move on to I might move cities someday and have to move churches, and like I feel like I will have just been fed so well and like really taught so many things about living with other people and living in a city the way that Jesus has tried to teach us, like trying to follow what he's taught us, I mean. And so through that group of friends and that congregation, I grew closer with Kevin, Meg, and they invited me to live in the house. And I hadn't really spent any time with Ben before that, I don't think.
No. I actually remember when Mare moved to Hamilton and she became this like artist in residence at Eucharist. And I was like, oh man, why did they hire this like nobody from Nowheresville?
Oh my God.
Who the heck is she? And then Mare,
Vicious.
New Twitter handle, Mayor.
yeah, I was
Nobody
like,
from Nowheresville.
Nowheresville.
nobody from Nowheresville. And
America.
It's like a knife, Ben. It's like a knife.
it's funny because you're from Baltimore. So
I am Miss Baltimore crabs too.
yeah. Oh man.
And also
and then-
very good at what you do.
I
Yeah.
love that.
It was really funny because we knew so many artists, and I was like, oh, why don't they do like somebody that's in our community
Better
that we
people
know?
here. You do have better
And
people
then
around here.
Meredith actually, on her way to and from the church, she used to bike by my house.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would see her on her yellow bike in this like purple t-shirt dress, just like biking by, and she would just like whiz by, and it was just like blur of purple and yellow. And I'd be like, oh, that's that girl.
Yeah.
And then there were a number of times where we had run-ins at different coffee shops, and we'd be at the same coffee shops at the same time, where we didn't really know each other, but we recognized each other. And then
Yeah.
I would be there like reading my book and like looking up slightly while Mara was coloring and be like, do I introduce myself? Nah. We probably will never get along and never be friends and never have anything in
my
common. I'll just go back to reading my book.
I just remember like seeing you occasionally at things like the Canon or whatever. I'm just like, there's that cute guy from church and he's reading another interesting book. And like we worked next to each other in like different restaurants next to each other for a while. And I thought he rode a cool bike, and then I didn't know anything about him. He was just like this strong, silent type, you know, just
like,
distant and aloof. And well, that turned out differently.
Nope.
That's fantastic.
I am a weak, loud mouth.
Yeah.
Steph?
Then Steph came along.
Changed the whole dynamic. Changed the pH of our entire house.
I think, I don't know. I actually, I feel like I chose going to Eucharist twice, the church that we all go to. I actually was raised in a similar conservative Christian upbringing and had, if anyone knows the biblical story of Jonah and the whale, I was Jonah and I found the biggest whale I could and basically ran away from knowing God, which I knew to be true. And there was at one point in my life where I was making some pretty poor decisions and some things were coming up. And I actually had 3 different people that I really loved and respected mention to me, have you heard of this church called Eucharist? And I was like, okay, this is weird. So I ended up coming to Hamilton and checking out this church. And I was there for maybe like the first 20 minutes and then I was like sobbing and I was like, well, this is now my life. So I actually moved to Hamilton and I got a transfer with my job at the time and got connected and I was there, like I said, like 6 weeks and then I was a volunteer coordinator. I have very strong admin skills, depending on how tired I am, I guess. But, and I was there for probably about a year and a half before I I think it was a little mix of self-inflicted burnout. And I mean, some situations that happened that I think maybe could have gone differently, but a lot of that had to do with me. And I basically decided that, or once again, had unrealistic expectations of what church could be for me, and I chose to walk away. And then shortly after that, actually moved away from Hamilton and decided I never wanted to live here again because it sucked. Because of my own issues, because people sometimes make those decisions and project that on other people. And while I was gone, I actually connected with a really amazing church that I never lined up with theologically, but I did encounter God in a really big way there. And when something came up and I ended up moving back to Hamilton, I was like 100% sold that I would never go back to Eucharist. And I remember
immediately came back.
No, I actually did not come to Eucharist. I think for the first 2 or 3 weeks that I was in
2
Hamilton.
or 3 weeks.
Which, like I said,
dives in, all in.
For Steph, 2 or 3 weeks is like 2 or 3 years for everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm hardcore. But I remember Kevin and I went out for like pho right when I got back. And whether that was his intention, Kevin just like listened to my story and kind of apologized. And we kind of talked a little bit about what had happened the last time I was at Eucharist and what had happened since then and where I was at. And he just kind of said, you know, you're welcome to come back if you want to, but no pressure. And so I kind of had checked out a couple different churches and put off going to Eucharist. And I just really at the end missed like a lot of my friends. And so I went to a service at Eucharist and like same thing, 20 minutes, I was crying and it felt like I was home again. But different in all the ways that I wanted. And it felt like the expectation that I had before of church had shifted in the time, but also what I felt coming back was closer to maybe what I had expected it to be. I don't know. Maybe just my perspective had shifted, but I really felt like it was a very healing experience for me to find a church that I lined up with theologically, but also like loved and cared about the people there and also like encountered God in a really real way. And so that's why I'm a Yuki till I'm dead. And I'm, once again, also the volunteer coordinator, just to be clear.
One of the cool things you get to see with church plants that you probably wouldn't see as much with like a more established church is like you really get to see the church growing up. And so like some situations that could happen at the beginning of a church plant might play out very different than they
A church
would.
plant meaning a church that you start with a group
yeah,
of people, which we
basically
did
from
back
scratch.
in 2010.
Right.
Our
But then
church was
7
like
years
7
later,
years
that
old, yeah.
situation might, be totally different. So
Mm-hmm.
I can see why it would be also very different to come back for that reason.
Exactly. It did feel very different. Like I remember like coming back, a bunch of people like greeted me at the door and they were like, "Oh, is this your first time here?" And it felt like really like I was like kind of, but also no.
Yeah.
It felt really, really weird. But it just felt like all the things I loved about Eucharist that had just grown up, which also maybe like I had also grown up in that time too. So
Meg,
or
do
hope
you,
so.
do you want to tell
Timing
some
is
of your
everything.
story? I mean, you've been a part of Eucharist as
Literally
long as I have.
from before day one.
in the dreaming stage, but I mean, I don't want to.
I grew up in the church and similarly conservative Dutch girl kind of family, but no real baggage, just like more of something that I had inherited. And so when Kevin and I met and were dating, he kind of brought up this idea of church planting. And I was like, I literally asked him, well, what's church planting?
Yeah.
And he told me, and I'm like, cool, I'm all in.
I was like, I heard of it a year ago.
That sounds
do
really
it.
cool. So yeah, I feel like that was kind of like something that, I don't know, the wind was kind of at our backs with, and it just felt really blessed. I don't know, just hashtag blessed. And like, yeah, there's been so many like trials and errors and hurts and stumbles along the way, but like that was kind of our first baby. And not that we take full credit for anything, but it was like Kevin and I being kind of like going out on a limb together and being like, okay, you and me will be all in, and who knows what else will happen, but like I'm in and you're in, and like let's just do this and see what God does through us. And like I'm just gonna commit and you're committed, and I feel like it's been kind of cool because as the church has grown up now, like I guess we're almost 8 years old. I've been able to like step way, 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 way back. Like at the beginning, I was like very, very involved, and now I'm like sometimes I can just like show up and just sit and be, and I'm not like, I don't feel that kind of responsibility that I felt at the beginning, which was really cool. And I think that's another thing about church plants is like you don't have those preconceived expectations that you have in a different kind of church where like what a pastor's wife would normally be, or like pastors' wives like have people over for dinner. I'm like, yo, I don't cook, like I don't really know. Or like pastors' wives run the kids ministry, or like pastors' wives do this, or they have to be everybody's friend, or like I don't know, there's all kinds of things that people like normally would expect. And I think because I knew that, because I had grown up in the church, then it was really easy for me to be like, I'm not doing any of those things. And I'm going to do the things that like I feel called to and that I'm good at, and that like I feel like God's pushing me towards. And that's been all kinds of projects over the years, but I've never felt those kind of expectations on me. And anytime like people have come along and be like, well, you're supposed to this and it's supposed to be like this, I'm like, why? No, it's not. Like, and I feel very at peace with that.
Yeah. I think that's what a church plant can do that's so beautiful is that like, why? You know, it can ask the question why, like, and sometimes the question is like, because it's really important that churches do this. Like, why forgive each other's sins? It's like, oh, because that's just what we do. You're like, oh, that's a good point. But then sometimes it's like, well, why does a pastor's wife have to functionally be on staff? That's insane.
Or like, you know, there's definitely been situations over the years where like so-and-so had us over for dinner, and then I'm like, oh, I bet they want me to have them over for dinner, but I'm just not good at that, so I'm not going to.
But I mean, somebody once said about our church, like Eucharist, and this is like, I appreciate, Mary, what you said, that like the churches have different gifts. And I actually don't in any way like tear down other churches because I don't want to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know? So it's good that they're doing it,
And
you
they
know,
wanna
that
do it.
it's important, but
Yeah, we
there's
need
also
all
an
the things.
importance for churches like ours, which are churches that are able to flip some of the conventional ideas about church on their head while trying to also continue on this old like tradition we're a part of in the way of Jesus and be in step with the Spirit in that way.
Yeah. And just to add to like my story with Eucharist, I think that's probably been the hardest part of being involved at Eucharist at such a deep level is that like Kevin and I have been there since the very first day, of course, and like have rarely ever not been there.
Yeah.
And so we've seen so many people like come and go. And as much as Eucharist, like a lot of things about Eucharist are very churchy and like very old school. We can sing a lot of hymns, and we're like really
like super Orthodox.
and we're really Bible-y, and like
we believe in the virgin
super
birth.
Bible.
Like, we
Yes.
are super Orthodox.
Yeah, and like we all about like
in the creed,
confession
Mary, you
and
have to.
forgiveness and all of these things, but and then in a whole bunch of other ways are really unconventional and are really like careful to like clarify those kind of expectations, or like not fall into these rhythms that churches always fall into. And so it's not been for everybody. And so to be those people who are kind of like,
You're breaking new ground. And
but to be the people who are never Kevin and I aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so sometimes church can be this like little bit of a revolving door where you're like, oh, okay, like I'm going to like invest my life with.
When you become the revolving door, like, oh, hi, Steph. And you had this great experience. Then it's like, oh, bye, Steph. You know, and then sometimes you get this beautiful, like, hello again, Steph.
Yeah.
But, for every one of those, there's, being a couple people that have, not liked something or not clicked.
Yeah,
and
there's been some
it takes an
heartbreak
emotional
over the years.
toll.
And I think that's definitely brought us closer as a married couple. So that's been really good. And like, it's helped me learn how to like let some things go and deal with some stuff on my end. And so overall, very positive experience.
Somebody once said Eucharist is like a front door, back door church, that it brings people in who have no, like, or very little or if any church experience, and is like, here's how you can follow Jesus from scratch. You don't have to be raised in this. Like, this isn't something you have to inherit. This is something you can actually inherit beyond biology lines. Or we're like a backdoor church, which is what all of you guys are saying. Like, people that are like, I don't know how I feel about church.
I'm
or
barely
faith.
here. Yeah.
And like, I'm thinking about dropping out of this, but somebody's like, come check out this church, and it becomes a space. Ironically, the person saying that was like, so I'm leaving because I'm not a front door or back door person.
Yeah, and I get
But
that.
it's like, hey, totally, if you are comfortable with the way church is, like, that's a great fit then. But if you're somebody that, needs a place to heal, and now a lot of people in our church have become just kind of more rooted in their faith, which is awesome. But it does start often with that front door, back door. Okay, so then on that note, let's kind of shift this from church world into home world. How have your faiths, our faith, how has that seeped into the home life? Or has it?
I like worship music. I like to play it a lot.
I come home and I'm like, oh, Steph's probably like pissed about something or cleaning because Bethel's happening.
Yeah, you can totally tell whenever
it's
somebody's
good.
feeling stressed because like out comes the praise music.
Oh, yes.
I think there was 2 weeks where I was having a rough time and it was like Hillsongs every day, and you're like, what?
Damn, Kevin's going through some stuff right
Going
now.
through something. We are on Hillsong.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steph.
I just meant that's like a thing about being at home that it's like you kind of hear and listen to everything that someone's doing. And I actually really love it when you walk into a space and you can hear someone else listening to music or worshiping or praying or you can tell that something else is going on. It just like can kind of pop your bubble of whatever else you're doing.
Yeah. I find that I end up in like we just talk about things relating to faith a lot more, because I'll come home and Kev's working at the dining room table, be like, oh, hey, like, how's your day? What you working on? And he'll be like, so there's this crazy piece in Ephesians where, and then he just like gives me the spoilers for the sermon on Sunday.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's always kind of fun to live with people who are also like working through their faith, because someone will be like, well, I was reading this, or I was thinking about this. And like Kevin will be working out like a kink in his sermon, or he'll be like writing something for his book, and like, he'll just want to talk about it. So then we end up having a discussion about something that like isn't like, I feel like I grew up in, like, I went to a Christian school and I went to a really evangelical church, and a lot of discussion about faith was either like getting ready for you to go convert someone, or like you trying to debate and convert someone, and never just like questioning for the sake of curiosity or desiring to understand more. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I have a lot more conversations that are about like, whoa, so what did you find when you like turned over that piece of scripture? Like, what did you find when you meditated that? Or like how has it been for you lately? Like, we just naturally have a lot more conversations that are about the living rhythms of Christianity because we do that together.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of, sorry, I'm going to throw back in. I feel a lot of responsibility, but like, not responsibility in a negative way, but in the same way, like, like after church, I'm always like, it's not like Kevin's going to quiz me on what I noticed in the sermon, but I'm always like, oh,
Hand out forms to as you
oh
guys.
my gosh.
That's
But I
hilarious.
also, I feel a little bit more like I do want to pay attention because it's something that you worked on that I'm like, Kevin, I watch you work hard on your sermon prep and stuff like that. And I'm like, so in other days where maybe I would like check out, I feel a little bit more responsibility to be like, I want to listen to this thing that you have participated in creating and also be able to talk to you about it later. Because I feel like if I do something like, if I've put on a play before and afterwards we talked about that and I'm like, oh, that's so helpful. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and so a lot of times I think it's helpful too, because you are a person who has like, you went to school and studied theology for all this kind of stuff, but you live with all these people who didn't do that. And so,
Which is so helpful
I
for
was
me.
asking these dumb
Like-
questions.
no,
But
no,
it
I know what I
is
mean. Like,
so helpful.
you kind of need the people who don't have that kind of experience with theology to be like, well, what does that even mean? Or like, yeah, a lot of times we can give you like real world examples of
Yeah.
things.
Perspective.
Well, yeah, there's a cool thing of like we bridge these worlds, right? And it's like, well, what does this look like in a kitchen? You know,
Yeah.
Ben works in a kitchen. What does it look like to be Jesus in a kitchen? What does it look like to be Jesus in a comic scene? What does it look like to be Jesus when you have like Steph? You've got such a like, let's go get it done personality. Well, what does it look like to hear good news from God when you've got that kind of personality?
Yeah.
And it really makes. I mean, faith is such a communal experience. It's not individual
Yeah.
only. It's really communal. And each person in our house, I think, adds another angle onto what it means to
Yeah.
live like a
Yeah.
fully human life following
Yeah.
Jesus.
I think it's like such an important thing for Christians to like not put themselves into like a Christian bubble where like they're just hearing the same things all the time. And like obviously you work in the church, but like for the rest of us, we don't work in like Christian work environments. And so it's been really helpful having this like sort of safe space at home where like I don't assume that everyone's faith all the time is this super strong thing and everyone's like 100% into it. But I know that it's a safe space for me to talk about my faith, to ask questions, to, you know, like for a long time, like it made me really nervous when like all my friends that were Christians like started losing their faith and stuff. And like that all kind of freaked me out. And now it's kind of like home is just like this non-anxious sort of place where it's like, it's okay. Like different people are going to believe different things and like that's not bad and it's not scary, but like you can also come home to this place where it's like we're kind of on the same page.
Yeah. I feel like I have just by proxy of living with, like I respect all of you as people out of the gate, but like in watching how you each apply your faith to your life and how you live it has been extremely like inspiring and motivating. And like I think I've had so many incredibly rich conversations about like a wealth of topics, like the amount that like Steph and I have discussed, like what God's plan and God's vision is for us as like single women who don't have an idea of like what the future might be kind of thing in terms of like marriage or family and like
Who's the head of our household?
yeah, exactly.
Clementine.
Certainly not Kevin.
When you move out of the household, who will be?
Exactly. Not moving back to America. My dad can't tell me what to do. My dad can't tell me what to do. Or like
Take that, Dad.
yeah, or like talking with Ben, who is also like a queer person, like a gay person, and figuring out like, is this even possible for me to voice this? Like having someone who has gone ahead and can speak out of like his life and his experience and his faith, which has remained a testament. Kind of like, I feel like there's so many times where through the different threads of relationship between members of our household, we are kind of all just sort of leaning on each other on this walk, which like a lot of times, like in scripture, Christianity, it's described as like a race, but a lot of times you are kind of just limping along or you're walking and it's not really, it's a bit of a slog sometimes. And so to know that like I have people who I know intimately, who I trust and who I trust that God is working on and where I see the fruit of the Spirit in their lives, like being able to live with them and live alongside them through all that has been like, I just feel incredibly blessed with that. Like genuinely, like it's a gift. To live alongside people who know what it is to be in these really tough places, but are still pursuing God's call in their life.
Yeah, it's been really helpful as a parent being in this atmosphere because like I'm trying to figure out, we are both trying to figure out right now, like how do we hand Clementine something for her to believe in? And I don't want to like ever force her to believe anything, but I kind of want to like pass down a worldview to her, and what she does with that is obviously going to be up to her. But you know, a big thing for us is like, you know, she has this book and we talk about the fruit of the Spirit and how like where we see God in the world is where we see, when we see love and joy and
joy.
She has little hand
Self-
signals she does for themselves.
Self-control.
And she
Shoves
fist
her-
pumps to herself.
fist
yeah,
bumps.
but
Control.
it's nice knowing that like, oh, everyone is on board with that idea. You know, like we all think that when
All
we
affirming
see love
that.
in the world, that's where we see God. And like,
And this
that-
is something I'd love to like talk about is like that being a Christian isn't just like checking off ideas. Like I think that that's often how people think about it. Like, do you believe in this? objectively like this fact. And that's a part of faith, but like I think equally, if not more so, is do you live this out? Like that really belief is putting your trust in actions. Like do you believe in love and peace and forgiveness? And like do you guys find that the actually like living out of the, let's say, ethics or values of our Christian life, like of being people that are forgiving and patient and kind, like do you see that functionally working out in our household, like that we have certain things that we ways we treat each other?
I love what Meg said earlier where she was like, well, I don't believe it every day, and like it was kind of a joke, but like we joke about that with like, I mean, Nadia Bolz-Wedemeyer says something great about the Nicene Creed is like you recite these prayers as a church, you say these things corporately because like you're not going to believe it every day. Like when you think about it, it's like there's plenty of days where I live as though I am the captain of my fate and I am the one in control. And so to come home and to be reminded by seeing the way that my other housemates choose to live, it like, oh, that is what I was called to. I didn't do it today, but that's what it looks like. And I can try it tomorrow. And like, they're not judging me for not, for donking it today. But yeah, like very, on a very small scale, I see it. Yeah.
And I think so many times in the New Testament, like there is conversations about living at peace with each other and living together as brothers and sisters and stuff like that. And that's something we just do every day. Like we get to do that. And I think that's like, we try to, as much as possible, and you've heard about this the last 3 episodes, that we try to live the way that we're talking about is the way that Jesus calls us to live. Like we're not perfect at it and we struggle with it. And you've heard about those challenges too, but like that's what we are engaged in is not just living the way that we live it in our homes in our everyday life together. We try to as best as we can.
I feel like it's a bit of like a chicken and the egg thing for me. Is like sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm having a hard day or like I'm feeling like annoyed or whatever. And so it's like, okay, well, I know that I can practice patience and love and kindness. And so then that's just like an easy sort of like guidebook for me. But then other times I come home and I experience those things from other people. And I'm like,
or
wow.
witness them, right?
Yeah. And I walk in and the house is full of joy, or like I can feel someone's like patience with clamor with me, and then it just like reminds me of how good God is, and that like people are practicing that out in their daily lives, and maybe not even intentionally, maybe it's just like it's just the fruit, and it sounds a bit cheesy, but I see it.
Even the assumption that like when you apologize to somebody that they will forgive you is like not something I think we can assume in every situation we're in. Like sometimes at work you might not apologize because you don't know if that person will actually take advantage of that and have a long record of wrongs. But I know we talked a couple weeks ago about a time that I like had to form a group message just to text a few of you in the house and apologize. And it was like knowing that our faith is not this head like intellectual exercise, but our faith is like an embodied thing of like, can we forgive each other? Gave me the freedom to say like, I'm going to apologize to you and say that I'm really sorry and ask for your forgiveness. And not to use that as a weapon against you, but to assume that like within healthy relationships, like the goal of this is to model Jesus, who tells us to forgive one another. And then when somebody doesn't just say like, oh, it's no big deal that you did that, they're like, actually that hurt me. Like you did sin against me. Like that sin of being just like you broke peace between us.
It didn't feel good.
It didn't feel good. I'm not excusing your actions. I'm actually letting them hit you, or hit me. And then I'm saying, but
it's
I
okay.
forgive you. I forgive you. Like it wasn't okay, but now it's okay because I forgive you. And that's such a beautiful thing.
There are aspects to our life together that do feel monastic at times, and I think it's just because of like this well of intimacy that's developed with us, which I think like we joke about Clementine being the center of the household, but I do believe like the love of Christ is what our household is rooted in. In so many ways, I feel like I am a good housemate, and I enjoy my role in our house because I understand and feel at home in my place within God's family. And I know that I can have these hard conversations with you guys when I need to, or we can kind of go to those places that are deeper and a little more raw because I'm already loved and known by God. And when we sit down, like we are both kind of sitting in that same place of like, above all, like we trust, like we know who God is. He's revealed himself to us, and like we trust what he's doing with us individually, with our house, but like in general with the world and the universe. And so like to be able like that, just that just like it gives us another bridge for understanding and for better closeness, and more space to really explore what it is to be close with another person and to really build something together is by being rooted in that idea of who God is and who he has made us to be, like what our identity is in him as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ben's,
What?
Yeah.
Well, look at me
you know what? Ben always
Ben's
has.
never gonna
I
fight
know.
his way
There's
into
no
a conversation.
pressure, but he's always got these nuggets of.
Oh, it's
So
okay.
occasionally
Well,
all four of us stare at Ben.
Yeah.
Come on, give it to us.
well, it's okay. So I'm gonna be the person who speaks up and says like I do have a really hard time talking about spirituality. I have a really hard time praying. I have a really hard time like getting in tune with like how God is speaking into life. And so like that was my disclaimer at the beginning of this episode that like, yeah, I have a lot of doubt. Yeah, I have a lot of history and a lot of baggage and a lot of uncertainty. And like, sometimes I have hesitation about jumping into like, not only spiritual conversations like this one, but also like spiritual environments, right? When Steph is playing worship music, I am out. Like, I am not in the kitchen. I am not in the living room.
not here for this.
I am not here for this. When Kevin was all hyped up on Hillsong, I was like, yeah. Oh, I can see you
for 2
really
weeks.
like it. Yeah. And then I was just like, gone. Yeah, it's just like something I like. It's not that like that I don't respect that in them or anything like that. It's not that I'm like brushing them off. It's like, okay, we're going into territory that I am super unfamiliar with, and so I am gonna just like pass the baton on to somebody who has a little bit more experience and a little bit more comfort level.
I feel like your like
And-
way of worshiping is like with a shovel on a farm.
Yeah, precisely. That's precisely it.
100%.
Which is a
yeah.
good form of worship.
Sure is. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good. You
and
and Wendell Berry.
absolutely,
Yeah.
that's like very much the way that I would do it. Like, I'm the kind of person who is like super content and happy to like do dishes or set up coffee or anything like that.
Yeah.
But like, if somebody was like, "Okay, Ben, can you coordinate volunteers and then like lead announcements at church?"
Immediately
Like,
dies.
No. Can
think
you
that
like
that's,
just
like-
do a prayer really quick? Like just an off the cuff prayer. I would just like melt into a puddle of
You
goo. That's
basically
just
turn
like
into my father.
Oh,
Dear
I mean,
Heavenly
like,
Father.
yeah, no. And
just for thinking of being the awesome God that you are.
Every Dutch man grows up into the old
Yeah.
same old
Yeah.
Dutch
But I
man.
think that's in part because, like, well, A, you are an old Dutchman or becoming, but also, like, I wouldn't say you're an especially emotional person. Like,
No, I'm really not. No.
You have that side to you, but that's definitely not.
Or like you're not also not like sentimental.
The
in
way
a
that
lot
you're
of ways.
Not
Yeah.
sentimental, not nostalgic, that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
I don't pine for the kind of like connection with God that I had when I was a kid. That's just not the kind of person that I am. And I don't even know that like I necessarily had that connection. See, you can hear me getting cynical already, right? You can hear me
Cynicism's
like analyzing and picking apart all these things about my
Yeah.
relationship with God. So yeah, it's like it's very hard. But the thing that I did want to say is it's really interesting to like as somebody whose natural posture it is to observe and to watch and to pay attention and to kind of listen and see what's going on. Like it's really good and healthy for me to stick around people who are practicing these things in their day in and day out. Right? It's important for me to not say, no, I'm checking out, I'm done, I'm not gonna stick around with this, I'm gonna like push against it, or I'm just gonna walk. Right? Like no, it's important for me to like be around and to kind of engage with it a little, even to my own comfort level, to say like, okay, these are people who are having conversations about God or who are like getting in touch with how the Spirit is moving in their life. And see, this language I already feel like I feel uncomfortable saying these
Shifting
things,
in
but
his seat.
this is this is the way that we talk about it. And so like hearing and seeing and witnessing and being in a front row seat to people who are like living out their spirituality is really good for me. It's also the reason why I'm still at Eucharist 7 years later after my initial reason for coming there has since left. Right? So, like I commit to this community and I commit to these people and I commit to like not really sitting Shiva, but like sitting in onto these practices, right? Like,
And I think that's good for us too. Like,
Yeah.
it's good for me to like not assume that everyone's like all in on this and all in on that, you know?
Yep.
And like you said, you kind of by being near people, like you're not always going to be like 100% going to church, but I'm always going to ask you if you're going.
yeah, absolutely.
It's
Meg's
just
always
like-
going to ask.
It's one of those things,
it's a
right? And it
good
works
thing.
for us.
Yeah. And
And I don't care if you say no. Like
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
it's fine. It's all fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to remind myself that Meg's not my mother and she's not like checking up on
No,
me or like.
I'm just
Yeah.
curious,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I want you to you do you, you know.
And I think like some people in circles I've been in would be like, oh, well, like you have to be all in or all out of faith.
Right.
And it's like, I do believe in a radical discipleship. And I think
Yeah.
that that's something that people should choose themselves. Like, am I going to follow Jesus with that kind of discipleship? But I also think there's space for people that are like, I don't know where I'm at with this. And what I love about Jesus is he never condemned people who weren't there yet or who were there in a different way. Or like he made space for people without that judgment to say like, just be around and watch. And he never had anything but compassion and love for those people. And that, you know, it is like two things. One, for people who are in that spot, like it is better, Ben, for you as somebody like who's not in that emotional space. It's better for you to be around, especially someone like Steph. I mean, I'm almost a skeptic too, but I'm in church where like I've become more comfortable with it.
Right.
But like Steph has this earnestness to your faith that I just think is so great. And like this really genuine, like, I don't need to, like, you don't get lost in your head with it. You kind of just, you're in it.
Nope.
You're in it emotionally too. And
I
I think
think-
that
I think-
probably only helps you because you love Steph.
Yeah.
And so you
Absolutely,
watch
yeah.
someone you love,
Yes.
love God
And
in
you're
a
a
particular
very
way.
curious person, so you're like even just like interested by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben will
Ben
often.
asks the best questions. Ben asks the best questions about any subject, but especially when you get into the deep stuff.
You'll often ask me things like, you know, how do you know that God is telling? How do you know God's telling you to do these things, or how do you respond this way, or
Right.
ask questions, or want to
Right.
know things?
Or why
which
do you
is-
feel like you should be doing this? or
Yeah,
that?
and I think that's
Yeah.
really, really helpful because it makes me check my motivations and actually answer those questions myself. Sometimes in a way that I like Kevin said, I'm not very much in my head about those kinds of things. So articulate those kinds of things is really, really helpful sometimes for me. But I also think it's also given me a perspective of the sense where like I'll have those answers and you might have different perspectives of things, and the way that you feel about it or how you respond to those things or how those things look like for you don't affect my faith, which I think is also super
In a
important to
negative
know.
way.
In a negative way, sorry.
Yeah,
In a negative
and-
way. So it's just kind of like wherever Ben's at, I just want to be as supportive and helpful to him. But also like if he's not at a great place right now, that doesn't change how I feel about Ben
Yeah.
or how I feel about my own faith, or I don't feel like I need to get defensive over it or anything like that. Like I'm just going to sit there and do whatever he needs for me to do.
Yeah.
And like what I'd like to say, like as the follow up to that, is that not only like is it good for you, but it's also really good for us to have you in our life, both in that like intellectual way, but also sometimes worship is going to the farm. Sometimes worship is pulling up weeds.
Yep.
Like sometimes worship is doing dishes. And I think that while like you might say like, yep, I'm more skeptical, your faith is in action. Is it like your faith is that you're here with all of us, and your faith is that you're in communities, and your faith is that within those spaces you put into work. Like a lot of us might sit around thinking and feeling all the time, and that's great, but really we've got to make some food and care for the earth and try to understand these things. And I think that like you also, God uses you to teach us.
Absolutely.
And I've seen that in so many ways, and especially we keep referring to the farm because you did this internship like on this farm, which was one particular case of it, but even just the day-to-day life that you have is that's kind of how you work in the world. Like get your hands dirty, let's get into it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's cool to see
Make a
the
mess, clean it up. Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's cool to see like we talk about seeing the fruit of the spirits versus like around the way people establish dynamics in the household, but also like seeing God's character through the way my housemates just are. Like seeing how patient and thoughtful and committed Ben is, and seeing how incredibly caring and intentional Steph is, and in seeing how curious and inventive Kevin is, and how just like kind and hopeful that Meg is. Like those are just some strengths that it's like these are who they are as people. And I see so much more, I understand so much about like the nature of kindness from like knowing Meg, for example, but like it's rooted in like God's character, which is like, it's nice to live around people who know that, because on days where I forget who I am, I have this crowd of people, like literally the amount of times that I've come home and had a bad day and told someone about it. And they're just like, well, this is how much we love you. And this is who you are. And this is what God thinks about you. And I'm just like blubbering on the, like that is more than one time that has happened. Not infrequent at all.
like kind of jokingly call this podcast Unintentional Community, but I think that name really applies in this episode because I think a lot of Christians, when they think about
Meg, this is literally my question I was about to ask.
really.
Yes, I was about to say, like, for
You guys
people
should
that
just
are
get married or
Christians
something.
listening to this,
Oh, that's so funny.
you might have a bunch of assumptions about
you guys have the same
intentional
brain or
community.
Oh my gosh.
something.
Well,
Oh,
anyway,
that's so funny.
I feel like the one thing that all Christians talk about when they talk about living in community is like doing devotions
Devotions
together.
every morning.
No,
noon, and
we are not. We are not about
Guys,
that
the
life.
book of common prayer for
I know.
ordinary
Okay.
radicals. Shane
And
Claiborne,
that
thank
is
you.
just a thing that we are unintentional about. And as you can tell from like this conversation, God is like alive and at work in our house, and it's beautiful. And we don't do devotions.
Maybe we
together.
should, but
We
we
have
don't.
had seasons. We did like one thing that we did do, and not even our whole household, but we got to host a small group with our church last year, and
Yep.
it was like Ben and I, and then Kevin May were in it. Steph actually was part of another small group, which was great. But like for our group, like we hosted it at our house, and we just would read the Bible to each other. That we didn't even really talk about it.
It's
a
like
ton.
story
It wasn't
time
a
Bible
housemate
time.
thing, though.
It wasn't even a housemate thing. We just all happened to be there, and that's like the most I can think that we've ever done devotionally
That
as
was
a house.
awesome.
It's great. I like
But I will say that one thing that's been really cool, like because we don't have a lot of common practices, like you said, like Ben doesn't listen to worship music, or like even finding time alone to like be quiet with God and pray is like probably a rare
We all have different
occurrence.
schedules. I'm not going to get up and pray with you guys in the morning because
Yeah.
I'm off to school. You're at work.
Right,
I'm
but
still
I mean,
sleeping.
even
blah, blah,
doing
blah.
those things alone can be
Yeah.
hard when there's 6 people in a house.
Yeah.
Totally.
But since Clem's like gotten a little bit older, we've started praying together with her, and I feel like that is like kind of a funny thing, especially for someone like Ben who's like, I'm not like a big prayer guy. It's like all
him
that we
holding
do.
Clem's little
Yeah.
hand.
Oh, we all hold hands, and Clem is all about praying. She loves it. But like all that we do is we go around the circle and we say, God, thank you for blank, and we all go around, and it's kind of funny because it all just like puts us on the same page. And like you don't need to be a person who's like really good at prayer, but like you can think of something that you want to thank God for.
But also, you can never think of something. It's your turn.
Yeah. And then
this
we go
feels
like
around,
sunshine.
yeah, and then we go around the circle and we
When
say,
Clem gets smarter, it's going to be a real problem.
Oh,
We're
it's
like,
insane.
thank you, God, for outside.
outside.
You said
She's like,
that
hey.
last
Yeah.
night.
That's what Mayor said. You got to be more specific here.
What are you
say that
thankful for?
Yeah. And then we go around and we say, God, please be near to so and so. And it's just like it's kind of funny because it's like, oh, I want to see what's in Clem's brain. Literally, she only ever prays for our neighbor.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah,
it's so
that's
nice.
so
the
funny.
name.
But at the
I
same
love it.
time, it's kind of nice because I'm like, oh, like that's what Ben is thankful for today, or like that's what's on Ben's heart today is like to be near to this person. And like as much as it's a cute little 2-year-old prayer, it is revealing, and it's like a little spiritual practice we have together. So
Yeah.
Which I think is actually like we've never talked. I don't know if we've ever named this or like this was just a practice that you guys put into place. But it's so cool that like Clem's first experience with prayer is to learn to pray for thankfulness and to pray for other people.
Yeah.
Because I think so many people, their first assumption of prayer is to pray for all the things that are going wrong in your
Or
own
what they
life or the
want.
world
Right.
or what
Yeah,
they
yeah,
want
yeah.
or things like that. But Clem's first like real connection to communicating with God is just to express thankfulness for the things that she loves in her life and to think about the people that she cares about and how she wants good for them.
shout out to you, Arella. It's all you.
It's all you.
love you. We all
All
love
those
you, Arella.
blessings falling on your head. man.
But
I
I
mean,
just-
I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say it's just an interesting way to think about. It's shifted personally how I feel about prayer and how I think about practicing prayer.
Totally.
I don't want to say any of this to say like you shouldn't do devos or something. Like
Of course.
we've only done this 3
If it
years.
works
heard
for you,
that
that'd
word
be
in, like,
amazing.
7
yeah.
years.
Devos.
Yeah. We probably
Devos, yeah, I mean, what?
probably could.
I
Guys,
think
if we start doing devos, I am out. I'm moving out.
we'll call them devotional times.
No.
not devos.
Quiet.
No.
Family
mean,
Bible
I
hour,
think-
whatever
No.
it
A
is.
devotional community.
I think
Sounds
that
like
there
a
are
radio show.
like we don't want to make assumptions that like in our home we have communicative people, which helps bring up
Yeah.
these conversations. But also we do have rhythms of like daily prayer. We have rhythms of Sabbath, but we also have rhythms of church on Sunday. And I think that is actually, if we didn't have that, I wonder how long we would keep this level of depth of like talking about our souls and our life
it's nice
if
that
we
we have
didn't
church.
have. And we all are a part of the
Because
same
we don't
church
depend on
community.
each other for our entire spiritual community, and like we do all go to church, but I think we go of our own volition.
Yeah, but also a lot of times, like we come home and like maybe one person wasn't at church, and then it's like, oh, the sermon was about this, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like we're all talking about that thing,
Yeah.
or like maybe we all were there, and then it's like kind of planted in our mind of
Yeah.
like, oh, like this is a thing I want to try
Yeah.
doing more of, or
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just don't want to like assume. I know people that have moved into houses together and we're like, we'll just die. We'll naturally have spiritual conversations. It's like,
I don't think so.
no, there is a bit of intentionality there. Like we are a little bit of an intentional community.
Yeah.
Like
but
whenever-
it's gasp.
Whenever I try to explain how we live, people will say like, oh, like intentional community, and I said no, it's an unintentional community. We're just intentional people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh.
That is very.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like I was thinking about, one thing that Jesus is all about is living a life of service. And I feel like that's a big thing. Like we keep talking about expectations, but I feel like a lot of that could be summed up also with like living a life of service in a house. And how does that work when you pass the point of like, oh, I did your dishes because I want to serve you, to like, you always leave your dishes out and I'm always doing them. Like there's like these things of like, what does a life of service actually mean? Oh, well, I think it means
Doesn't mean being a doormat.
it doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean taking advantage of each other. It doesn't mean being lazy, but it also means like being really gracious and looking for ways to serve each other and like finding ways to support each other and like going out of your way and not only being self-serving. And like, so I feel like with that as like something in the back of all of our minds has really helped. And it's something that we're all intentional about.
Yeah.
It makes you an intentional person, but it's not like we have this thing on the doorway that's like,
Totally.
live a life of service. Like,
We've just grown into all these
Although
things.
we do have a big sign on our front window that says "Love thy neighbor."
Yeah, that's true.
We should
That's
put
true.
one above our kitchen that says "Know your audience."
Yeah, jeez.
it could say audience of one.
So maybe wrapping up with this question: is there a story that maybe anyone here has about a time when we, as followers of Jesus, are told to be like the hands and feet of Jesus? We're also told then that the people that we love are also Jesus. So everyone's Jesus. But is there been a time where you feel like the people in this house have been Jesus to you, have treated you in that kind of way? And does anyone have a story about that to kind of wrap us up?
Yeah.
I literally moved in and was immediately just Jesus. Can I just like verb
A
it
verb.
like that?
Got Jesus that real hard.
Jesus up.
What do you mean, that you were turned into Jesus, or
No,
that
no,
you
no, no,
experienced
no. I was-
Jesus?
I-
Y'all
Jesus,
needed
I got her
Jesus.
very
Yeah.
exuberantly, and she was Jesus.
I moved into the house at a
sound good.
really. I was going through a lot personally, and it was originally supposed to be a short-term situation. Jokes on everyone, but I was moving in a place where I was going through. I mean, some might
bad
call it
times.
trauma. It was just bad times.
It was bad times. It was
And
trauma.
I was a mess, and so I literally had times where like people would take my phone away from me or sit with me and pray with me, or like the first night, like I remember Meg was like so worried about like the condition of my room that I was moving into it, and Ben like made my bed the first night,
Like
and,
military style. What
like
she doesn't know is
literally
that I
like
YouTube
hospital
videoed
quarters.
and made it with military
She moved
corners.
in.
and
I think
so
you moved in a
tight.
little earlier than we thought you were going
Yeah,
to. So it was just
yeah.
like, okay, operation, make stuff, welcome.
Yeah. But it was like
And
it
stuff
was
is still broken in her room from when I'm like, the floor's broken over there. We'll fix it next week.
Yeah.
Nope.
No, we never fixed it.
it was just like right away to come into a place where you're dealing with whatever negative things you're dealing with at that time, and to immediately be without like any context of who I am, or I hadn't earned anything, I hadn't done anything. We talk about in our faith, we talk about adoption a lot, and inheritance, and that was the kind of thing where like I was literally adopted into this family from a place where I had done nothing and was bringing at that point nothing to the table, and immediately I was just greeted with so much warmth and support and grace and patience, and people who wanted to cheer me up and listen to me and just support me, and that was just right off the bat.
Totally.
And just as a disclaimer, we're like telling some of the Jesus-y highlights here. We're like, we mess this up all the time.
Oh yeah, you all by this point in this podcast know we're pretty much humans.
Yeah,
and,
we're just normal people.
we are
Yeah.
telling some nice stories.
Yeah.
Because who wants to listen to the like all the? Well, we've shared
I mean,
a lot
that
of
would
the
be
We've
interesting,
shared
too.
some of the
Yeah.
worst already,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I feel like I had a really amazing in like the worst and best way, but just very intense time last summer, where I had been like on a spiritual retreat and like reflecting, and came home with like I had a vision, and like I had all this weird stuff happen when I was praying and talking to God about like my life and the direction for it, and like I came home wanting to like confess to some sin in my life, which like I am a Christian and I do this, and I still hate the terms confessing to sin, because I'm like, that's so like brutal and harsh, and like I don't want people to feel like the judgment and the retribution that comes with that. Like I came home and I just knew that I needed to confess this sin and ask for forgiveness in sort of like a tiny scenario where like the people around me were like my family and God. And it was in a different way than like anytime I'd come home to like my family or my parents with stuff like that. Like there have been times when I've shared things with other people who are Christians and who I know love me, but just like it hasn't gone well. And we still love each other and we're very close. But like there's just been times where like I've been met with condemnation, or I've been met with just like like things other than the assurance that like God is in control and that God loves me, which is like very hard to take if you're in a really vulnerable place with something like that. So like being able to come home and like it was something in the sphere of like relationships and making compromises in relationships. And I just came home feeling very convicted of that. And so I was able to like sit with my housemates and say like, can I confess this to you? And you said, yes, we'll hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
I knew it happened.
It's okay. It was a very beautiful,
And
profound
like,
time.
it's like we hear it. Like we receive that, but like we love you. God loves you. Like this is how God has called you to live. Do you want that? Like right now, do you want to choose that with us? And I was like, yes, this is all part of it. And like we literally like we prayed in the house, like in the living room. We sat up on my bed just in my room and kind of like consecrated my living space because it just felt like this thing that had permeated where I lived and it kind of come home to roost with me in a way that was dark and was really putting a wedge in between me. And it was so funny because it was the kind of thing where like this thing that I had brought home and wanted to confess, like they prayed with me, they offered God's forgiveness to me because we can do that as Christians. We get to do that to each other. And like from then on, I did make missteps in that area. Like from that, like we're talking about, like to put it on the, like we're talking about sexual immorality, which is a really touchy term. And if you're not a Christian, then you won't even understand why this is such a big deal potentially.
Do a
but
whole
like
other podcast.
that's a whole other podcast.
Separate.
And like it was the kind of thing where they then like I made missteps after that, and I kind of broke it again, and I kind of messed up there again in times after that. But it was never like I was never met with like disappointment from them. I was never met with like anger or anything like that, even though I'd kind of broken like house rules and gone back on like when I had asked them to, you know, sit with me and listen to my confession and forgive me and all this. Like they kept me accountable. They kept asking like, okay, Mare, like where are you with this? Where are you seeing God calling you in this? Like, how do we support you in that? Which then led to like making deeper changes as life went on, as time went on. So like it was one of those things where I realized like it's never like a one and done conversation with the hard things, but they were just incredibly consistent with how loving and how kind they were. When they could have just like pointed back to like the book and the rules and said like, well, you just need to do this and you're not doing this. But instead we're like very patient with me and very understanding and coming, like I knew that I could tell them all this stuff that was hard to get off my chest because I trusted that they had my best intention at heart, but like not just like that they loved me, but that like they really wanted to see me become who God's calling me to be. They really wanted me to be like walking on that pathway. And that's just like one example, but that's like not the only time that we've gone to some of those like really intense places together. So,
Thanks for sharing that, Mare.
Yeah.
Pro tip to people listening: when somebody comes to you and says like, here's something I need to confess. And to confess is just to say, like, I have to speak the truth about it. Because every day we don't tell the truth.
It's weighing on me.
It's weighing on me. And that's the thing that people should understand. Like, good Christian confession is like, God is weighing on me. Like, my own conscience is weighing on me. It's not rules that we throw on each other, but it's trusting that if we invite God to live in us, God does. And then our hearts push us to be the healthiest people we can be. And if someone comes to you and says, like, I have to speak the truth about this and, like, confess this, you don't say like you don't say
yeah, I noticed or something like that.
Like, well, you know that's bad. It's like, yeah, that's why I'm here, you idiot. Like, but also you don't say like it's not that big a deal. Like someone's conscience is already weighing on them. You say like, let me listen, and then you say, I love you. This is who you are, and you are forgiven, and you give them the gift of forgiveness. Yeah. And you don't say if it ever happens again, you're in big trouble. You say, and if if whatever your thing is ever happens again, which it might, you're still exactly that person. And you know, when you come back to me, I'm going to remind you of that and forgive you again. And like, in the same way that hurt people, like healed and forgiven people, heal and forgive people. And I think that is like all the pompous religious language and like all the ways that we'll talk about like church and all these things. Really what it comes down to is like, are we forgiving and healing one another in the way that Jesus forgave and healed us? And like, are we becoming that for one another? And I think that is like the most tangible way to live out this faith. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and trusting that like when someone has something heavy on their heart like that, that they're coming to you because they need to be free of that thing. And so to draw more attention to it or to not draw enough attention to it, it's like you just need to be free because like you're just meant to be a free person. And to not ever use that as a weapon against somebody. So like I hope that you feel that way, that like that's never been held over you or
Never.
And you have like, you were just so vulnerable with us, but like there are so many times where you have been Jesus to all of us, where you have like you have encouraged me so many times and I'm like, I don't know, is church worth it? This is hard. I'm tired. Does it matter? And you're like, this does matter. This is important. Like
I need this or I'll die.
like and like where, you know, where you've articulated things about walking with God that are just like so healing and valuable. And so this really is the cool thing about this house is like, and the cool thing about your communities, whoever you are, like if you have a community that is rooted in this Christian imagination and this way of viewing the world, is you are called to be Jesus to one another. And I guess it might be worth throwing out there that like, if you're not Christians listening to this, you wouldn't call yourself Christians or whatever it is, no judgment. That's absolutely fine, but find a narrative that can bind you. And I'd really challenge you listening to this, like find the best story you can. And for us, we think that story is best captured in the person of Jesus. And I would definitely recommend you check that out. And if you want to find a cool
Can't not
church
tell
in
you to
your
check it
city
out.
or town, you email askahouse@gmail.com and I'll find you a cool church.
Yeah, and at
But
the very least, like
at the
surround
very
yourself with people who are like calling you to be better and
They
like
want the best for
want
you.
the best
Yeah.
for you
Yep.
and like want you to be healthy and like and are there for you when you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
Yeah, I think that living in a house with people, we live together in a house, and it sounds so simple, but it's just like you just see the real versions of people, and like we've all seen each other on bad days, and we've all seen like the days where we can't even, and like to just know that like I'm accepted and loved when I've got nothing to give you guys is like so profound to me, and like that's where I see Jesus. And like I didn't know being a mom was going to be so hard. Some people have more kids, I'm sure it's even harder, but I just have come down from like sleepless nights and hours of breastfeeding, and I'm just wearing my house coat and I'm a frazzled mess, and someone takes my baby and like someone's already poured me a coffee, and I'm like, that is just like a cup of coffee is like where I've seen Jesus, and it's so
In Jesus'
simple.
name.
So
Yeah.
many times.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
Well, that's all the time we've got for this week, even though we have so much
I want to
to
know
do.
where Ben saw Jesus.
Ben?
Oh, good grief.
Ben was so excited.
Ben
that
has
you
a
were cutting it
forward
off.
answer.
All
Yeah.
right, no, we got time.
Oh, good grief, guys. Put me on the spot.
Ben's thankful for and
Ben
wants
is
God to
thankful
be
for it.
near.
Well, I think I kind of answered this already in saying that, like, I see Jesus in the way that you guys all interact with your spirituality, and then the grace that you provide each other with, and like the grace that you provide me with. Like, I'm not a model housemaid by any stretch of the imagination, and I think that is Jesus to me in a certain way, but it's also like when you guys engage in the hard conversations with other people, and then I hear about it, right? Like I'm a front row seat, and keep saying that. When I see you guys do that, like it inspires me to do that as well, right? To speak up for somebody who is, who maybe won't speak up for themselves, or like who is being taken advantage of, or speak up for yourself if like somebody is taking advantage of you or something like that. And like in those ways, when you pursue justice, like, or pursue righteousness or any of those things, when you pursue those, like those aspects, it really speaks to me about how to model my own, behaviors and stuff like that. Like yeah, that's how I see Jesus, and it's a very like here and there kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not like pointing around the house being like, Jesus, 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 Jesus. It's not really like that, and that's not how my faith works either. But it is those things that come deeply ingrained in me. Like, I'm the kind of person who absolutely hates conflict. I hate confrontation, anything like that. But watching you guys like go into these scenarios where, you know, you have confrontation, you have conflict, like my initial reaction would be like, you know what, just write it off. Just like, screw it. Like, never mind, just brush it out of your life and then move on from it. But where you pursue, like, you really go after making sure that, like, okay, we're going to deal with this in a way that is like loving and is Christian and is that community focused and like is peace oriented, like all of those things. Those are the ways in which I see Jesus, and those are the ways in which I like really look up to you guys, but also like look to our broader community, and then take those examples into, you know, into my life in different ways. So
That's cool.
Yeah.
And now we are officially out of time. So that is it for this week. Next week, we're going to be answering questions. So if you have questions about this week or any other topics, just email them in to askahousey@gmail.com. Housey spelled HOUSIE
Yeah.
Correct.
at gmail.com.
gmail.com.
Ask a Housey and send us questions, and we will jump into that next week. Thank you guys so much for
that'll be
joining us yet
right.
again, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Oh, guys, I hate that sign off so much.
Okay. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unintentional Community Podcast. We are mixed and recorded in downtown Hamilton at Sheepdog Studios. Special thanks to Gareth Inkster for that very catchy jingle. And you can go get his new album on anywhere that you get your music, called Last Year. And don't forget to send your questions in to askahousey@gmail.com. Of course, Housey is spelled HOUSIE. Askahousey@gmail.com, and we'll answer those in our 5th and final episode. Have a great day.